Math 3, Unit 7, Section 6. So today we're talking about completing the square with parabolas, okay? We've talked about completing the square before, but when we were completing the square, we were doing them with circles. And so you had your two squared terms and all that stuff. This time will be different because we only have one squared term. So isolate the variable that is not squared. Okay, and it kind of gives you an example here how you have an x squared and then a plain y in the equation. Okay, once you do that, if there's a coefficient in front, and for every problem that we're dealing with today, there is, you need to factor out the coefficient because we want to complete the square and you can't have a number in there when you're completing the square. So for us, we ended up when we were completing the square, we made a plus blank right here. Do you guys remember that? Mm-hmm. And what's different about this from the circle is you know how we were adding the same thing to both sides of the equal sign so that it balanced out? Mm-hmm. You could end up adding something here and then you'd end up having to subtract it to bring it to the other side. To skip a step-ish, we can keep it on the same side, but in order to balance it out, if you are adding a number, you also would need to subtract it in order to balance it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? The other thing that you have to be careful about is that this 5 has been factored out. So this 5 really is being multiplied to each of those terms, correct? And so that means that you would need to subtract a 5 times whatever the blank is in order to balance the equation. Is that clear? So if like we ended up with a 3 in here, 5 times 3 is 15. In order to balance it out, you would need negative 5 times 3, which would make a negative 15. So then it's like we're adding 0, right? Because 15 and negative 15 is 0. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So then remember to complete the square, we take our middle term, we divide by 2, we get that answer, we square and get 9. So 9 is the value that ends up going into each of those blanks. And so right here you can see a 9 is in that blank. And then it's kind of written, oh my goodness, written weird over here. But then 5 times 9 is negative 45. So then we simplify that just like we did in the circle, but it was just on the one side of the equation. And so when you complete the square, you have y equals 5 parentheses x plus 3 squared minus 2. And it's in the correct form. Okay? So not super crazy. The only difference is that we're going to have to factor out a number, and then whatever number we are multiplying here, we have to multiply to our other blank. And instead of adding the blank, we're subtracting the blank. Okay, if you have cell phones, please put them away. Okay, and so remember this from yesterday when you're graphing the parabolas, when you have y equals, okay? The shifting is similar to what we did before, where if you have a plus c, it's going up. If you have a minus c, it's going down. If you have a plus c in your parentheses with the x, that means that you're going to go left. Good. And if you have the minus c, it means you're going to go right. Correct. Okay, but on the x equals equation, it's slightly different, and because we are doing the function of y. So when you have a plus c on the outside, you are going right. A minus c is left. And then if you notice inside how this is y inside, that's why you're going to make that is going to end up going down. Okay, because we do the opposite of what's in parentheses and y is in there. So that's down. And then minus c is up. Good. All right, so now we're just going to start working on practicing completing the square and then also dealing with graphing. And we talked about line of symmetry when we originally talked about parabolas back at the beginning of the year, and we're going to add that back in. But we're going to start by completing the square. Okay, so it's fun that we're starting with x equals. Okay, so a different one to begin with. What number would I end up wanting to factor out here? A 4, good. So we have x equals, and we're going to go 4 parentheses. Now, when we divide each of these numbers by 4, I end up with what inside here? Y squared. Minus 8y. And then we put plus our blank, because we only want the stuff with the y's on the inside of the parenthesis. Okay, so on this one, we just keep the plus 16. It's just going to be, or sorry, plus 61 on the outside of the parenthesis. Okay, because this is, we're just keeping it in our correct form for a parabola. Okay. So then what's going to be my other blank? Because if we have one blank, we really need 2 blanks, right? So what am I going to write over here?
Negative minus 4 blank.
Good. Minus 4 times my blank.
Is that because you divided 8 negatively by 2?
Yeah, so basically it's because there's a 4 outside of this parenthesis. So this blank is really 4 times the blank. So we have to have minus 4 times that blank. All right? Okay, so what's my next step on completing the square?
Find the blank.
Good, so what do I do?
Divide 8 by 2.
Good, negative 8 divided by 2 makes?
Negative 4.
Negative 4, and negative 4 squared is?
16.
16. So 16 is the value that's going into each of my blanks. And so we have x equals 4, and then what is my square? So remember, my square is coming from factoring this right here, right? And we found that when you factor this, you're making a square, right? You get 2 of the same parentheses, and it's always with that value. And so that means in this parenthesis, it's going to be y minus 4 squared. And y minus 4 squared, if we were to multiply that back out, it would get to that equation. Correct? Okay, and then over here, we're just going to simplify this so it's just one single number. Okay, so we have 61, and then negative 4 times 16 is?
Negative 64.
Good, negative 64. And 61 minus 64 makes?
Negative 3.
Negative 3. And so we have a minus 3 here at the end. And now our parabola is in the descriptive form. Okay, do I need to go back through any of that right now? Okay. Okay, now this is something where I feel like I didn't quite explain it correctly, but I'm going to show you something from a previous unit here. So you know how on all of our problems before we had a fraction out in front? If you notice today, this is not a fraction, it's a whole number. You with me? So with this one, we really were setting 4c equal to the reciprocal of 1/8. Okay, because what's the reciprocal of 1/8?
8.
8. Okay, but I didn't say that's what we were doing. I just said put 4c equal to the denominator. Okay, but that's what we were really doing, is going 4c equals the reciprocal. Okay, so that means on this one, in order to find our c value, we would set 4c equal to what?
1/4.
Exactly. 4c equals 1/4. Okay, so, and if we want to, let's make a note, and we put set 4c equal to the reciprocal, so that you can go back and look at that. Okay, so there's 2 ways of doing this right now, but do you guys know what c is going to equal? Okay, so I'll show you a couple different ways.
Is it 1?
No.
Dang it.
So you know how we would normally divide by 4 to both sides? So you'd come over here and divide by 4. Well, this is basically a fraction divided by a fraction, because you can write 4 over 1, right? And so in order to get rid of 4 over 1 here on the bottom, I'd multiply by 1/4. And whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So these all canceled out, that canceled out, and so you end up with 1 over 16. Okay, I'm going to show you another way, just so whatever makes sense to you. So the same idea here, 4c equals 1/4. Actually, there's like lots of ways. You could multiply by the reciprocal like this. Just go ahead and multiply by 1/4 to both sides, because that still cancels that out, correct? and then you're just right here, multiplies by 1/4, and we get 1/16. Do you guys want me to show you a third way?
I like that one.
Okay, you like this way? Yeah, okay, I'll show you one more way, and then we can just decide what way we like best, and then we'll stick to that for all the other problems. So the other one is if you have 4c equals 1/4, how do we get rid of fractions? Multiply by the common denominator, so you could just multiply both sides by 4, that cancels those out. 16c equals 1, and then you divide by 16 to get c equals 1/16.
Oh, I should have that one.
You guys like that one the best? Okay. So, basically with all of that work, we know that c is 1/16. Yes? Okay. So, the first thing when we're graphing, we need to go back to our original equation or not our original, our descriptive form, and write our vertex. So what is our vertex?
-3, 4.
Very good. -3 and +4. And we're all good with that, right? We know if y is in the parentheses, it's always the opposite of what's in the parentheses, so the y value is +4, and whatever else is left, that goes in the other spot. Okay, so let's graph that. So we're going to left 3, up 1, 2, 3, 4. Make our point.
This is a big graph.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead and skip the line of symmetry for right now.
Yay.
Focus. So looking back at our equation, which way, remember how we kind of draw a little picture to help us out of what the graph should look like? Which way should our graph be curving?
To the right.
Very good, to the right. So anytime it's x equals, it's curving with the x-axis. If it's positive, it's right. If it's negative, it's left. If it's y equals, it's going up and down versus and with positives and negatives. So my graph goes like this, which means that my focus will be going to the
Derecha.
or right. Okay. All right, so 1/16. We don't have to be exact, right? We're just going to go a little bit to the right, and I'm going to go ahead and put an F there to remind myself it's my focus. Okay, and then for my directrix, I'm going to go left 1/16, and this is my directrix. So let's go ahead and try to write those values. So my directrix is actually easier because if you have -3 and you're adding a 16th to that, it's going to be what equation?
Y equals negative, or
-3 and 1/16. Is everybody good with that? Oh, and that's not y equals, it's x equals. Okay. Your focus, you're just taking 1/16 away. So what's that going to be?
-2, 15, 16.
Exactly. Good job. -2 and 15/16. Okay, and then it's going up to 4. Okay. So when you have 1/16 and you're going backwards a 16th, the 1/16, you're just taking your denominator, 16, right? And then it's like you're putting it as 16/16 and you're just taking 1 away. So if it was 1/8, when I went back, it would be 7/8. Does that kind of make sense? So you're just taking the denominator and going 1 less from whatever that denominator value is. Okay, now how do I figure out how far I'm going up and down for my focal chord? Good. So we're taking our 1/16 value. So we're taking 2c. And so that's going to be 1/16 times 2, or we could write that as 2/1. So what is that going to end up making? 2/16, which reduces to 1/8. So from my focus, I'm going to go up an 1/8, 1/8 up, and 1/8 down. Okay, and then we can draw that. So my focal chord endpoints, okay, we are still at, and what's nice is that it lines up with my focus, okay? And so my x value on my focal chord endpoints, both of them on the x are going to be the -2 and 15/16. So you don't have to think about that part because they're lined up with the focus, okay? And then this one, so from the focus, it's going up 1/8. So how much is that?
4 1/8.
Very good, 4 1/8. And if we're going down 1/8, it would be 3 7/8.
Will there be a lot with these fractions?
On the test?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, but I'll look at it and get back to you guys tomorrow. So line/axis of symmetry, whichever, we call it line of symmetry, right? Yeah. That always goes through your vertex, cutting your parabola in half. That's also a line, which means you're writing it as an equation. And so what would be the equation for my line of symmetry? Y equals 4 is correct. Okay, questions before we move on? But we're gonna keep getting a lot of practice with this. Okay, let's move on to the next example. Okay, so basically we tried to give you every different type of scenario that could possibly happen with these equations. So on this one, before we had a whole number we were factoring out. Now we're factoring out a fraction. Yay! Okay, so let me show you how to do this. So I feel like I need to go back here for just a minute. So remember when we factored out the 4, I was dividing each of these by 4. So this time I'm going to end up dividing by 1/3, which is just dealing with a fraction and a fraction. It just takes a little bit of thinking, which you guys can totally do. So y equals, we're going to factor out a 1/3. So this one's easy because it's just going to become x squared. Now the tricky one is that we have this 2. And what I'm doing is I'm going 2 divided by 1/3. Okay, and we just talked about this. How do I get rid of that 1/3?
Times it by the reciprocal.
Times it by the reciprocal, right? And so 3 over 1, and whatever you do to the bottom, you also do to the top. And so these cancel out, and we end up with what? 6.
That wasn't too bad.
And you can kind of double check yourself. Like if you were to distribute the 1/3 back through, it should equal the 2. Okay, so we're good? And then what do I do next? Very good, plus blank. Now we have what on the outside of the parenthesis? Plus 4. And then since I have 1/3 times the blank, I need?
Minus 1/3 times the blank.
Very good, minus 1/3 times my blank. Okay.
So you just take the opposite.
Yes, so because you're trying to balance it. So if you add 5, you have to subtract 5 in order for it to balance, like it never happened, okay? All right, what am I going to do now?
You're going to divide 6 by 2.
Very good. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So 9 goes into each of these blanks. When I'm writing my equation, we have y equals 1/3, and what is my square?
3. X plus 3.
Good, x plus 3 squared. And then we're going to simplify over here. And what works out really nice is that I get 4 minus, and what does 1/3 times 9 make? 3. And 4 minus 3 equals 1. So plus 1 at the end. So now we have that in descriptive form. So besides that, what else do I need for graphing purposes?
The vertex.
The vertex, good. We do need the vertex. And my C value. So I kind of like to do all my math if I can before I start the problem. And so let's find what C equals. So again, 4C always equals the what? The reciprocal, right? Let's just start saying it that way so we remember. So 4C equals the reciprocal. So what's the reciprocal of 1/3? 3. Good. And then what would I do in order to get C by itself? Very good. And so my C value is 3/4, or we could write it as 0.75. What would you guys prefer? It doesn't matter. 3/4 is good? Okay, either way, write whatever you want. We can't agree. Okay, let's move on to graphing now. And I'm going to go ahead and circle my equation here. And then we also know that C equals 3/4. If you want to, we could write 2c right now. Do you guys want to do that too? Okay, so for 2c, that would be 3/4 times 2, which ends up making what?
6/8 or 6/4.
6/4, and that would be 3/2, which is 1.5. I think it's easier to think about that as 1.5. So that's 2c.
How
Yes.
did you get the 2C? Like, why did you put that?
Why did I get 2c?
Yeah.
Who knows? Why do we need the 2c value?
Always 2C like the 4C?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Okay.
Because remember, your focal chord is always the distance of 4c.
Okay.
So to figure out how much to go up and how much to go down, we do 2c.
Okay.
Good job.
Wait,
Yes.
couldn't you cross divide and get 3/2?
Yes. And 3/2 also.
Equals 1/1.
1.5. And like for graphing purposes, I feel like 1.5 is better than 3/2.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So next thing, let's go ahead and find our vertex. So what is my vertex on this problem? Very good. And again, I like how you guys noticed that this is the x now. And so the x value always opposite of what's in parentheses. So that's -3, 1. And so let's go -3 up 1, make our point. Which direction is my parabola going to be going this time? Up. Very good. And we know it's up because it's y equals, so it's going to be curving with the y-axis, and it's going up because my a value is positive. Okay, so from there, we know that we're going to go C for my focus going up, and so we're going to go up 3/4. And then again, I always like to put a little f there to remind myself that is the focus. And then we're going to go down 3/4 for my directrix. So let's go ahead and try to write those values. So what is the value of my focus?
-3 and 1 3/4.
Very good. -3 and then 1 3/4. Okay, what is the line of my directrix?
Y equals 1/4.
Good, y equals 1/4. So if from this point we're going down 3/4, that means it's actually 1/4 away. Is everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then in order to finish graphing, we need our focal chord endpoints. And so that's where we did 2c, right? And we found already that the 2c value is 1.5. So from my focus, I'm going to go right 1.5 and then left 1.5. Okay, and then we can draw our curve. So what are those focal chord endpoints? What would we write those as? Okay, -4.5 and 1 3/4. So this time we know that they're the same distance as the y value. So we don't have to really think too much about the y value because we already have that on the focus. So there's always one point that's going to stay the same on our focal chord endpoints that we don't have to like think too difficult or too hardly about. Okay, and then the other one is what?
-1.5.
Very good.
No, you seem so bored.
And my line of symmetry this time is going to be going,
X equals -3.
very good. It's going right through there, through the focus and the vertex. And that is y equals -3.
Isn't it X equals -3?
Yes. Good job, Candy. Okay, x equals -3. Any questions there? No? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, again, notice how we're dealing with equations. All of them are looking differently, just so you can have that idea of what each one of these would look like and the best way to solve it. We can see that there's already the y minus 1 squared. No cell phones. So we don't want to mess around with that, right? We just want to leave that alone. You can already see too that x is kind of by itself. We just have to end up removing things from it. So, does anybody have any idea what would be the best way to get rid of that 5?
Subtract
This,
or divide.
So like if I distribute it, I'm gonna have a 5x, which is not gonna be very helpful. And I don't remember back in previous notes, I can't remember which one it is to show you, but the easiest thing is to divide everything by 5. So you could move things around here, but I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna divide everything by 5. And when you do that, you have to divide everything in the equation by 5. But 0 divided by 5 ends up making what? 0. And so these 5's cancel, and this cancels. It's just going to be 0. And then because we like that to be out in front, remember we'd write that as 1/5 y minus 1 squared plus, and then I just have my x plus 2 equals 0. What do you think I should do here next? Okay, so if I subtract x, okay,
you get a negative.
I'm going to rewrite this here. I have negative x equals 1/5 y minus 1 squared plus 2. And Jordan brought up a great point there in that this is a negative x and we need it to be
Positive.
positive. But this is fine. This is probably the least amount of work. What would I do in order to get rid of that negative?
Divide by negative.
Good. Divide everything by -1. Now I want you to know that this whole thing right here basically is one term. So you're basically, when I'm dividing by -1, I'm just dividing that by -1 and the 2 by -1. And so we get x equals negative 1/5 y minus 1 squared minus 2.
So you leave the term out in front.
Yes. The other thing is that you could have, you know, subtracted this to the other side, subtracted this to the other side. The third thing is, or the third way, is that if this is a negative x, you're just going to change the sign here and change the sign here. That's all we did when we divided by -1.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. So now we have our equation. Okay, what should I do next? What do we still have to find?
Find C.
Find C. Okay, and so when we do this, we always write 4C equals the reciprocal, and so we're just going to write that as 5. You can put -5 if you want, but we know where things go. So what do I do to solve here? Divide by 4. Since this is greater than 1, I would change this like to a decimal or a mixed fraction. So 5/4, what does that reduce to?
No.
1.25.
Very good. So that equals 1.25
What is that?
equals
in,
C.
What is that in fraction?
1 and 1/4.
That makes it equal.
Okay? Yeah, so
Oh yeah, 0.25. I'm getting it.
1 and 1/4. We can do either way. So should we go ahead and do 2C now just so we have that done? And so 2C would be 2 times 1.25, which will end up equaling 2.5. Okay, so my 2C equals 2.5. Okay, so we have all the information we need now. What is going to be my vertex?
Oh, hold up. -2.
Very good. -2, 1. Let's go ahead and plot that. So we're going to go left 2, up 1, make our point. Okay, this one did not ask for all of the information, and actually you'll find on your homework that some of the questions want everything and some of them only want certain things. But for our notes, I want us, even though they're not here, let's go ahead and find everything, okay? So we're going to go ahead and add our focus and our directrix. Sorry, you can't see what I'm writing. We want to find our focus, we want to find our directrix, and then we're going to go ahead and do our focal chord endpoints, okay? Okay, so for my C value, where am I going? Oh, and I forgot to say, which way will my graph be curving this time?
To the left.
Very good, to the left. So that means that we take our C value, which is right here, and we're gonna go left 1.25 for my focus. So that's 1.25. And then we're gonna put a little F there. And then my directrix, we're gonna go right 1.25. And let's go ahead and write what those are. So what is my focus?
Negative 3 and 1/4.
Negative 3 and 1/4, that works. Comma,
1.
1, good. And what is my directrix?
X equals negative 3/4.
Good, x equals negative 3/4. Okay, next we'll do our focal chord endpoints. And so we found that 2C was 2.5, so I'm gonna go up and down 2.5 from my F. So 1, 2.5, and then down 1, 2.5. So then I can draw my parabola. Okay, what are those values on there?
Negative 3 and 1/4, and then negative 1 3/4.
Okay, so negative 3 and 1/4, and then you said it was down
Yeah.
1.5, right?
Yeah.
Negative 1.5. And then this one went up 1, 2, 3, 3.5? Do you all agree?
2.5, wait, yeah.
Yeah, 3.5.
3.5? Okay.
So it'd be negative.
All right, and what is my line of symmetry?
X equals 1. I mean, Y.
Very good, y equals 1. How many times is this going to cross the x-axis?
1,
1 time. How many times will it cross the y-axis?
none.
None. And so it's usually easy to see how many x-intercepts and y-intercepts by just looking at the graph. Yes?
How do you find the line of symmetry?
It is always what's going to cut your parabola in half. It goes through the vertex in your focus.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so it's just whatever that point is there.
Okay.
So it depends on which way the curve is.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, let's move on to the next one. We have 2 more to go.
Thank God this is.
I actually think this one is a little bit easier as well. Okay, so because of time's sake, we're just gonna keep going through. We have 2 examples to go. We're gonna finish this, okay? What would I need to do first in this problem? Very good. Factor out a negative 2. When I do that, and I like to write this out so that I don't mess up on like positive and negative signs, we end up with x squared, and then what do I end up with?
Negative 4?
Minus 2x.
Oh, wait, minus 2.
And then what?
Plus blank.
Plus blank. And then we have,
Minus 5.
and then what?
Plus 2 times the blank.
Plus 2 times the blank. Good. Because since it's negative this time, in order to balance it out, we need a positive, right? Okay, what will I do to complete the square?
Divide the middle term by 2.
Which makes,
1.
Negative 1.
and we square it,
1.
1. So 1 goes into each of my blanks. So when we write our equation, we get y equals negative 2, and then what goes in my parentheses?
X minus 1 squared.
X minus 1 squared. When we simplify this over here, we get negative 5 plus 2, which equals
Negative 3.
negative 3. And so we have minus 3 at the end. Not too bad.
Oh, crap.
When we're finding 4C, what do we always do? We always set it equal to the...
Reciprocal.
Very good. So we have 1/2. We decided the easiest thing to do on these problems was to get rid of the fractions.
C.
So I'd multiply both sides by 2. And so when I do that, I get 8C equals 1. And then we divide by 8, so therefore C equals 1/8.
What is negative?
And remember we talked about, you could write it as negative, it doesn't matter. We know that we're gonna go the certain directions up and down. Okay, and then 2C would be 2 times 1/8, which will end up making 2 over 8, or you could just reduce. This is a 1, this is a 4, and we get 1/4. Okay, so that is my 2C value and then my C value. What is my vertex? 1, -3. So we're going to go right 1, down 3, make our point. For my, which way is my curve going to be going this time? Very good. And so we know that since it's going down, my focus is going down, and so we're going to go down 1/8.
Sorry for the interruption. Will the owner of a Ford Limited please return to your vehicle? Your lights, your hazard lights are on. License plate number 6. Y is in
Okay.
yes, S is in Sam.
Directrix.
Mary
Up
133.
1/8.
Please return to your vehicle. Your hazard lights are on.
What a lame car.
I have a Ford Expedition Limited, just so you know. No.
Still lame.
Oh my god.
Okay, anyways.
These notes are all.
Yes, thank you, sorry. Okay, so we went up our C value for our directrix, down for our focus, and that means that from my focus, we have to go
1/4.
1/4 to the right and 1/4 to the left, and then we can draw our curve. What would be my line of symmetry here?
X equals 1.
Very good, x equals 1. For time's sake, we won't write all the different points since they didn't ask us anyways. And the number of x-intercepts will be what?
0.
0. What do you think the number, because if this goes on forever, how many y-intercepts would there be?
Infinity.
Only 1. Because this could end up crossing that y-axis, right? As it keeps going down further and further and further and further, it would.
True.
Okay. Are we good there? Okay, last page, last problem. Okay, I want you to look at this equation.
Oh gosh. Oh, I remember this.
Yes, what type of graph is this one, and how do you know?
It's the, I don't know, but when you put them together.
Good. It's gonna end up.
Was I right?
We're gonna do 2 completing the squares. You're gonna put your x's together and your y's together.
So I was
You're
right. Oh my goodness.
Okay. Well, let's just see what happens. But if you guys look at the graph part, it kind of gives you a hint as to what type of graph this is. Can you guys look in the B area? What do you notice?
Circle.
This is the B area. B.
Oh.
B. Yeah.
What's up?
Circle. Thank you, Brandon. Okay. So we're gonna complete the square on this. So we're gonna make our parenthesis with our x stuff, and so we have x squared. Then what?
Plus 6.
Plus 6x plus blank. Then we get our y's. So we have y squared.
Minus 4.
Good. Minus 4y plus
Blank.
blank. Okay, what do I do with this number?
You subtract it.
Good. So we're moving to the other side. It becomes a minus 6. And because I have 2 blanks on the left side, we're going to need it to have
2 blanks on the right.
2 blanks on the right. And these are both plus, because when you can balance it also by adding the exact same thing to both sides. Okay, what do I do to complete the square?
Divide the middle term by 2.
Good. And that is 3. 3 squared is 9. So 9 goes into my first blank here, which means it goes into my first blank on the other side of the equation. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and negative 2 squared is 4. 4 goes into this blank and this blank. My x as a square will be,
X plus 3.
good, x plus 3 squared, plus my y will be,
Y minus 2 squared.
good, y minus 2 squared equals, and we combine all our terms there and we get 7. Okay. This is where some of you made mistakes on your quiz that we took. What is my center for this?
Negative 32.
Negative 3, 2. So we can go left 1, 2, 3, up 2, make our point. What is the radius?
It is 7.
That's where you guys messed up. So this is r squared. So r squared equals 7. So we take the square root of both sides, and we get that r equals root 7. Now, on a graph, I'm not quite sure what root 7 is. So I would plug it into a calculator. Or you can get an approximate, because you know the square root of 9 is 3, right? So it's going to be less than 3. It's going to be 2 point something. Right.
It's 2.6.
Yes, 2.65 or what?
Yeah, 5 if you round.
Okay, let's do 2.65. Not that it really matters that much. So that means in each direction we're going to go 2.65 to make our circle. So up 2.65, right? 2.65, down 2.65, and left 2.65. And then we can draw our curve. And then we're going to figure out what the rest of these questions are. Okay, radius. So for the radius, we're going to go root 7, which is approximately equal to 2.65. How many x-intercepts do I have? There's going to be 2. How many y-intercepts? 0. And we know that is true because it's going 2.65. It's never going to end up touching the y-axis. Okay, are there any questions?